So what I'm here to talk about is, because I am a Brandeis professor and environmental historian, although I still take my students out to the farm and stuff like that as much as I can, mainly so I can get out of class. I want to give some context to this idea about local food and regional food in New England. And what my idea, I've been trying to do some research on kind of what we reasonably could do. If we really put our minds to it, how much could we grow and what kinds of things would that be? And the other thing is that the idea of food security, local food security, really baffles me. If food security is used to mean that all people of whatever income level should have access to good food, that I understand. That's a difficult problem, but that's an important part of food security. But the idea that we need food security in the sense of could Amherst or Northampton or some town, any town, grow a huge percentage of all its own food locally is to me like, wow, why would you want to go there? If we get to that point where we have to plow up all the yards and tennis courts and stuff to grow our food, we're going to be insecure in so many other ways. You can forget about food security. I mean, that would be a social calamity that would cause that. So don't get me wrong, I think there's huge benefits to growing more stuff locally, more stuff regionally than we do, economic, social, and environmental benefits. But the idea that we should be somehow trying to do it all so that we're secure, it's like, well, we can grow our vegetables, but vegetables are a fairly small part of our diet. So, so anyway, what I want to look at is my idea from just crunching some numbers of kind of what we could do, or what, and you may have different kinds of ideas about what's sensible and what isn't, but this will give you kind of one way of looking at it. So if you hit the next slide for me, I'm really interested in this period, say from 1900 to the Second World War. Yeah, the land's going back to a lot of the land is going back to forest, but at the same time it's quite a productive and successful agricultural system. It's feeding the cities with a lot of regional production, a lot of milk. So the peak of milk production in Massachusetts was between 1900 and 1910. A lot of market gardens around the cities. Poultry is taking off. Fruit, pork. It's a very suggestive period because it's an urban and industrial society just before oil transforms it. So if we're thinking about what a post-oil society might look like, it's interesting to look at the pre-oil society and say, this is rather suggestive. A question I wanted to ask, and I've been doing a little research on this and sort of crunching numbers, is let's just say that we succeed beyond our wildest dreams with local and regional agriculture, way beyond our wildest dreams, and look ahead 50 years. This is not a prediction. This is just like what's potentially possible. And say we could get as much agriculture in New England as is kind of feasible, or set some kind of bounds like that. What could we grow? What would it make sense to grow? So do that, that's 40 million acres, and make some assumptions for 2060. So one assumption is that population grows rather slowly. Maybe it'll grow faster, and that would mean it would be harder to grow more of our own food. But let's say 15 million. It's projected to grow slowly for what that's worth. And most of those people are still going to be urban and suburban. Maybe more of them are, I don't know. Another assumption is we eat better than we do today. And to get at that, you can just sort of take the USDA food guide and kind of see which is fairly mainstream, it's not radical, and crank that through, or you can look at the Harvard Healthy Eating Guidelines as well. You can look at a couple of them and just, because that lets you do a calculation and it assumes the kind of world we would like to see, many of us. So that's a lot less meat, especially a lot less red meat. It's half of the red meat or less than we're eating today. It's a diet with fewer calories and a lot more fruits and vegetables, twice the fruits and vegetables. Americans eat less than a cup of fruit per day. All right, another assumption. Energy is going to be a lot more expensive. I have no idea how much more expensive, but enough to make a difference. And that our society will be finally making some effort to reduce our carbon footprint. Another assumption, we're talking about sustainable farming. However you want to define that, that it minimizes environmental impact, doesn't pollute streams, et cetera, et cetera. And in particular, we're talking about farming that fits within a protected forest. We got all this forest back. New England is now 80% forested. Most of that's in Maine. Maine is half of New England. But still, Massachusetts is 62% forested. And there's huge environmental and social benefits from protecting forests. Biodiversity to water quality to local renewable resource production, rural economies, recreation, the whole bit. So that would mean instead of 2 million acres in farmland, there would be 6 million acres. Let's look at what we might be able to do on 6 million acres for 15 million New Englanders, mostly urban, suburban, eating fairly healthily. And these are preliminary. And this is what I got so far. Vegetables are reasonably easy to do acreage-wise. It just doesn't take that many acres to grow the bulk of our own vegetables, 250,000. There's about 100,000 acres in vegetables today in New England. The seasonality is the interesting part. What do we do to extend the seasons? What do we do to process and preserve more? What do we do to shift our diets during the winter? And how much do we want to keep importing some fresh stuff? But basically, that is extremely doable, producing the great bulk of our own vegetables here. That doesn't, and again, it can be a lot of it around cities and suburbs on small acreages, and then some of the root crops and butternut squash and stuff like that you can easily see in rotation with hay production and so forth out in more rural areas, potatoes. If you want to, though, increase the protein part of the diet that's vegetable from more beans, soy or lentils or navy beans or whatever, you're talking about a lot more acres. There's essentially no acres in beans in New England today. So that's a pretty big number. It is doable. You can fit it in there. How much we'd actually want to do in New England, I'm not sure, but you could see those also in rotation with a kind of a pasture, hay, potato, bean farm or whatever. There are different ways of doing that. But now fruit is very interesting. To produce all the fruit that we consume in New England is about something like 500,000 acres somewhere in the world that it would take to do 2 cups a day for people. That's sort of what it shakes out to. So theoretically, we could find 500,000 acres for fruit in New England, but doing half the fruit seemed really sensible. So that'd be a mixture of fruit juices, maybe replacing some soft drinks, and whole fruit consumed in various ways, which is really a better way to consume it because you get more fiber and so forth. So half of it means that the other half is still orange juice, oranges, bananas, kind of tropical stuff. So the issue then is, are we willing to pay the social and environmental, full, fair trade, sustainable costs to bring that stuff to us here? I think most people want to keep eating those sorts of things. So to say we're going to do all our food here is, I mean, you could crank that in, I suppose, but this seemed reasonable to me. Here's the big number. If we so New England produces roughly half of its own dairy consumption today. It's complicated. A lot of stuff comes from New York. Stuff leaves Vermont to go to New York City. But bottom line, it's about half. So if we did all of it, and if we did it on grass, so with jerseys or something like that, which are a little less productive, it would take something over 500,000 cows, and just you do a quick calculation of that, and it takes you 1.5 million acres to produce all of our milk, butter, cheese, ice cream, and so forth on grass with a little supplemental grain. But it seems doable. I mean, it's a big curve. People are working on management-intensive grazing. So there's examples out there. But really, that's the thing we didn't do in the 19th century. The pastures were not well managed. So if we can learn how to do that, that is actually doable, but it means clearing a lot of land. Bottom line is we can actually do it on the red meat, on the ruminants, on grass, and it's a very big number in terms of where we'd need to clear a lot more land. That would be a wonderful, sustainable kind of farm system. Here's a really interesting one. We can produce all our own pastured pork, our broilers, our turkeys, our eggs on these pastures, you know, with the hen mobiles and all that stuff. So that requires 0 acres. But really, they got to eat feed grain. That's what they're really eating. So, you know, you can easily fit them in on paper. I mean, it's a lot of poultry. You can run the pigs in the woods. There'll be plenty of wood pasture. But you got to find the feed grain. I mean, we've been importing grain into New England since like 1790, when there were only 1 million of us. And if you run the grain through your chickens and so forth, you're bringing nutrients to your pasture system. But that's okay. I mean, that's sort of thinking about what's regional, what's national, and trying to see this as a whole system. Yeah, out of my 6 million acres, having got this far, there's about 1 million acres left over, which you can use to produce some feed grain, some grain for human consumption. If you want to grow all our own barley for beer in New England, that'll take 200,000 acres. If you want to grow half of it, that's 100,000 acres. That sounds reasonable to me. We got a malt, you know, business started in the valley now. we're growing a little barley on our farm. Good stuff. It could be vegetable oil. It could be, you know, mixing with those beans, whatever. We can do some of that. Growing local grain is a very cool thing. Growing all the grain we need to eat ourselves and run through our livestock and all the rest of it, I mean, I just don't think the acreage is ever going to be there, or in a way that we need it to be there. For this whole thing to work, we need a lot of fish, a couple times a week. And that raises a whole nother issue of sustainable production from the Gulf of Maine, which, if clearing 4 million acres of pasture out of the forest looks tough to you, think about trying to restore a sustainable fishery in the Gulf of Maine. So that's kind of the basis of what I think we could produce, broadly speaking, which is, you know, it's like half of our food. It's a fairly inspiring kind of thing. But it also kind of brings up the necessity of our links to other parts of the world and the country. So here's what we can't grow. And I will finish up. And the way I did it here, you know, we're still bringing in half of our fruit, our orange juice and grapefruits and bananas and avocados, which is technically a fruit. A lot of feed grain, vegetable oil. And then this stuff, you know, peanuts, coffee, tea, chocolate, however much sugar is kind of left over. I mean, yeah, maple syrup and honey is great, but it's just very small compared to even the little bit of discretionary calories that are kind of left over. You know, if you're a locavore and you're trying to convince people that what that means is that we're not going to have this stuff anymore, you're not going to win that discussion with very many of your neighbors, and why should you? I mean, if this can be produced sustainably, and again, if we pay the full freight and do it in fair trade kinds of ways, to me, you know, it's sensible to eat those foods, and it makes us a cosmopolitan culture as well as a regional culture. And I don't think there's a lot of us who in this room who want to be just one or the other. So that's kind of a snapshot of what I've been thinking about with some other folks. It raises a whole host of other questions, obviously, like how we get there. And again, it's not a prediction. It's just sort of where we might be able to get to. It raises questions like the key ones like, all right, who has access to all this food? How do we see that everyone has access to it, not just, you know, upper middle class people at some kind of affordable price? So there's a number of things we need to do to make it accessible because this is a fairly expensive way of producing food, so we have to figure out how to subsidize it because of the wide range of benefits we get from it. You know, we have to make sure we understand how all people can eat it. Another interesting question is who the farmer is going to be. I'm not too worried about that one. We're not talking about a lot of farmers to do this. There's 30,000 farms in New England now. This would take, I don't know, 50 or 100,000 out of 15 million people. It's not a big number. And there's a lot of people who are eager to farm in various ways. And to me, it's all good. You know, kids coming out of college like I did, spending a few years farming, deciding they don't like it, is good. It's not like the moral is they didn't really like to farm. The moral is they loved it for a few years. Community farms are great. Backyard gardens are important. Full-time, hard-driving farmers kind of leading the charge are important. The whole spectrum is different ways for different people to engage with farming in ways that make sense within their lives and maybe at different points in their lives. And that's an important social benefit of farming. So where we're going to find the farmers that know how to do this is not a big worry to me. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried more about how they get access to land, which is kind of what you're here to talk about. How do we make the connection between the people who are going to own those 6 million acres in a whole variety of interesting ways and the people who want to farm it? And again, to me, I think it's going to be a wide range of things. Another thing I should stress, especially what we started out talking about, is we can't do this by just supporting our existing local farmers. We need more farmland. We need to protect a lot of land. A big key to all this is to transfer the enthusiasm around local farming to protecting farmland, protecting forest land, having the land base there in a way we know it's going to be there for a long time. I think that's really key. There's all kinds of other questions before us, infrastructure, slaughterhouses, preserving, distribution. There are a lot of things that need to happen to have a complete food system. Huge tasks that lie before us, but to me, I'll just close by saying, yeah, that's what we spend our lives doing. That's the real work, but it's nice to sort of have some kind of picture of where you'd like to get to that's at least plausible, right? Where you can say to people, yes, we can actually produce quite a lot of food in New England and not just be shot down by someone who says, well, this is all, just kids playing in the suburbs or something. So that's it. That's enough, and do you want to take questions? What's the next step here?
The next step is to talk about